and welcome to the inaugural episode of AI Times from the AI Infrastructure Alliance, also known as AIIA. I'm Mike Vizard, and along with my co-host Lee Baker, General Secretary for the AIIA, it's our pleasure to bring you the first in what will become a series of ongoing episodes focused on all things AI. All right, let's just jump right into it. Rebecca, welcome to the show. What's your perspective on AI ethics these days, and where are you from? And walk us through all that.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me. Big questions. I guess I'll start, trying to tie those two together. I started off at Stanford studying AI, but actually I studied out before that when I was about 7 or 8, when I was an extra in a movie called Bicentennial Man. And I don't know if any of you remember it, but it was this Robin Williams movie about a robot trying to become a human. And so that was that's my first start with AI. And my acting career did not work out. Ended up at Stanford studying AI. And kind of, the question continued: what does it mean to be human in an AI world? What does it mean to be artificially intelligent? So some of these big questions were really exciting to me. And back when I graduated, not too long ago, about 10 years ago, I was really trying to get a lot of people to talk about ethics. I organized a seminar. I could only get a few people to come. And I was back at Stanford last week, and they actually have programs now. So every CS student for every CS class has to, there's an ethics component to every single course. And to graduate, you have to take an ethics seminar and all these things. So I think to the question of can we get really practical about ethical AI? I think it has to be part of the culture. And it has to be part of the mindset. And I think we're seeing more and more that as more, these case studies come out and we start to see how things could potentially go wrong. We are, we're getting ahead of it, and it's starting to become part of the zeitgeist. And I guess, back to my background, I started out in AI, implementing, and then in about 2018, quantum computing came onto my radar, and I implemented enough to really understand where the limitations lie in terms of today's hardware, at least at that time. And so the idea of being in quantum computing, which is going to unlock so many different use cases when it comes to AI, when it comes to technology broadly, that was really exciting for me. So I got into quantum computing, and I'm now have been in the space for a few years, for the opportunity to be at the forefront of something that will really shape where technology goes. And so that's me. I currently work I started a company called QuSecure, and we do cybersecurity to address advancing threats, one of those being quantum computing.
All right. No ethical issues around cybersecurity these days whatsoever.
Definitely not.
Haniyeh, you want to introduce yourself, where you're from, and go from there?
Sure. Thank you for having me. So I'm Haniyeh Mahmoudian, a global AI ethicist with DataRobot. And to kind of both answer your question and also weave in my experience in the area of AI ethics. So the answer is absolutely yes. We can have kind of AI ethics in a practical form. But one of the challenges that we have is a lot of frameworks, a lot of principles that we see out there. They're either high level or very abstract. So for organizations, it's hard for them to implement those frameworks or bring those principles into their workflow. So part of my role and responsibility is to work with our customers to create the applied version of these frameworks that would be applicable to their use case, to the way that their processes work, and also think about what kind of features, what kind of tools we can have in our product at DataRobot that will support our customers, whether if it's around privacy, whether if it's around bias and fairness, how we can put these tests and tools into our own products and provide it to our customers.
All right. Thank you very much. And Mike, let's kick it over to you. And
everything they said was wrong, and I can't wait to shred it. It's hard to disagree with those points. my background was video games, military simulation. I have a PhD in computer science, but in the VR side, not AI. And I retired and got into AI, unretired, to focus on black box, because I think it's so abhorrent that we're using techniques that may or may not be ethical, but nobody knows, to apply to such safety critical, human critical decisions, whether it's parole or food distribution or weapons targeting and the like. So I've got a startup, Diveplane, where we've built a fully explainable machine learning solution. So I think of ethical AI as sort of two fronts. One is the notion of the sort of social issues of ethics and how ethics vary so greatly from country to country. And so the notion of let's build something ethical on a global scale doesn't make any sense. Google and Baidu are both global companies, right? So how do you handle the ethics? Well, it's really about allowing the inspection of what's going on from soup to nuts. I liken it to a coffee where if you want a responsible cup of coffee, you have to start with responsibly sourced organic beans and not underpay the farmers and not exploit anyone along the way through transport all the way to not having your barista make $3 an hour and work 15-hour shifts. The whole thing has to be ethical for you to have a cup of coffee you feel proud of. And AI is the same way. You start with good, clean data that you know what's going on, where you got it, and the provenance is safe. And everyone along the way believes that that data should be in your hands for the use that you have for it, all the way through to an inspectable, transparent algorithm at the end to complete the task you want to complete. How's that?
That sounds great. And of course, my co-host is Lee Baker, who's from the association. Lee, explain your role and how you got into this whole function and jump us into the next question.
Thanks, Mike. I appreciate that. So yes, I act as General Secretary for the AI Infrastructure Alliance, or IA, as we call it. IA is designed to be a forum, an alliance for kind of ISV software vendors in the machine learning space, specifically kind of the MLOps space, because we see the need for best of breed components when you're building out your machine learning pipeline, not least for reasons of ethical best practice. So hopefully IA is not ducking the big questions. I think we're certainly going to get into some of that today. So what better place to lead off, because some of the notes that our guests touched on already is there are a number of different kind of frameworks or ideologies or regulatory kind of principles for ethical AI. How do we mark our homework? Is there one abiding principle that we should be adhering to? Or do we build out our own kind of appropriate AI data governance? What does the panel think about how we govern this from a corporate and an individual responsibility? And Mike, seeing as how you kind of prompted that, I'm going to kind of push that to you.
So, I mean, there's so many different ways to skin this cat, right? I would say that this isn't an individual concern other than building a good culture. Rebecca talked about training in ethics, and we just released a project, the Data and Trust Alliance, which is a super neat organization of Fortune 1 and Fortune 100 companies focused on literally data and trust. And the project was M&A due diligence. If you're going to buy a data or AI company, or if you're going to invest in one, what should you be looking for? It's as simple as that. And that's a hard question to answer if you're Insight or if you're GE. And so much of what we built in that framework, and it's, I think, publicly available at this point, was about the culture of the organization. Because at the end, what's really going to matter is that every implementer throughout the chain is thinking about how am I treating this data, and what is the algorithm I'm building, and how are we double checking we haven't built something biased, and what is our audit process? And you can check each of those boxes, but if the reason for it isn't there, it's still not going to succeed. So it comes down to, does this company have a mission statement that involves trust? And does this company understand the data, where they're getting, what the value is? And so I guess it comes to this individual level of understanding what ethics are, and then trying, how do I implement those on an everyday practice to hit the gestalt of what you're looking for.
Can I follow up on that with you? What exactly is the difference between ethics and, say, just trying to optimize something? And I'll give you an example. the Department of Justice is looking into some SaaS application that is designed for landlords, and it optimized, rental property prices on behalf of those landlords. And I guess the question then becomes, are they manipulating something at the expense of tenants? But, from the perspective of the landlords, it's just an optimization. They're trying to figure out what is their best price capability, and they're using an algorithm to do that. So is that a good instance of AI, or should the tenants get together and build their own counter AI to get their own ethical setup going, where they're going to say, hey, we're going to figure out an algorithm to get the lowest price rental property? And, are those ethical considerations, or is that just the fundamental nature of capitalism?
Mm-hmm. So the way that I would look at it is, when we're building AI, part of the process is optimization. We are trying to optimize for a solution for a problem that we have and get the best outcome out of it. But what we miss here is, have we considered human as part of this process? To be able to understand what would be the impact of this system that we are going to apply, whether if it's on tenants, whether if it's on employees who work on shifts. What would be the outcome of this optimization on them? Are we providing something that is, we considered their feedback, we considered their kind of aspect into the process, or we purely thought about optimizing the cost or increasing efficiency? So that is the aspect that's missing in this part. So we didn't bring tenants as a stakeholder into the process of building it. And when we are thinking about the ethical aspect of it, one component of it is also bringing all these stakeholders to the table when we are thinking about building an AI system. And also thinking about running an impact assessment of the system. How this system, what are the benefits of the system? What are the risks of the system and the impacts that it's going to have? And how we can actually think about, maybe it's a good system, but we need to tweak some aspects of it to make it work both for the landlord side and also for the tenant side. So all these considerations should be part of building in, even when we start the process, even prior to building, thinking about these aspects of it. So for me, the part that's in many cases we might be missing here is the consideration of the human aspect of it.
So that just seems it seems so difficult to do. It's a little bit because that's a purely adversarial relationship in some ways. If you're thinking short term, if you're thinking long term, then yes, you want happy tenants over a 10-year cycle. But if what you're trying to do is maximize profits in the short term, your absolute job is not to make the tenants happy, but to maximize profits, which is probably maximizing rent. And the idea, I love that notion of stakeholder, but it's sort of like saying, let's make sure we bring the targets in of this military targeting system. The guys who are building the missiles to shoot at our ships, we should really talk to them first before we set up an AI to defend against missiles, right? It doesn't make any sense because their goal is not aligned. And I think that system is just simply echoing the goal. I think there's sort of a core problem with, if you have a purely capitalist society that doesn't particularly care whether the tenants are unhappy or if some people can't live there anymore. But I don't think of it as exploitative to do that if the laws and our ethics think of that as acceptable. Because someone has to disagree. It's a panel.
So what does that mean then in terms of role and function? So we hear a lot about kind of the chief data officer or kind of data governance roles. Rebecca, in your mind, what does the function look like that can kind of own this on behalf of the organization or customer?
It's a great question. I think there's both questions bring up kind of the question of, altitude or different groups and these different stakeholders, right? So I was part of a group that authored some governance principles outlining, taking a lot of learnings from HPC and from AI, outlining principles that governing bodies can start to think about and implement, right? So you've got your governing bodies. And then, on the other side, I think we have to be thinking about one thing that we talk a lot about is a huge part of this is empowering the people. So, in your previous question, the tenants, but anyone whose data is going to be used, I think there's, I think we're evolving past this, but traditionally there has been a lot of kind of gatekeeping in AI and deep tech, right? You can't understand it unless you've studied it. But I think popularizing this and getting across the awareness to everyone who this is going to affect so that people can self-advocate. But back to your question, Lee, in my company, we're relatively small. We're 50, 60 people. I am chief product officer, and I've kind of taken it on myself. We've done things like have a product management checklist for each stage of the design to build to test to iterate process, where you're thinking, okay, where am I getting this data? Am I representing all demographics that are going to be affected, et cetera, et cetera? So I think product managers have a good responsibility. I think it's often got to come from the executive level as well. Yeah.
So, Mike, following up on that, do you think that, ethics is a slippery slope? So do we need to just kind of say there are certain use cases involving, say, life and death issues where we need to clearly have some sort of ethics applied, but it's not this, golden metric that can be applied to every transaction or every application in the world. We need to figure out some sort of balance. Is that what we're looking for here?
Well, I mean, from our perspective, writing explainable AI, I'm not trying to target advertising optimization. I don't particularly care if the 0.3 microcent difference between the Facebook ad price of a target for, let's say, literally the company Target is black box or not. I'm not really worried about the gender bias that might occur in that. I'm a lot more worried about what happens in residential loan decisions or parole or the others. So yes, I think the level of, let's say, ethical scrutiny and time spent with stakeholders is much higher when it's more safety critical, human critical. So yeah, I think absolutely. That notion of playing by the rules is a tough one because I think we have bad rules right now. And so if you're playing by rules to gather data, let's say you're LabCorp, right? What's the data you're gathering on people? You've got their full DNA, and there's a whole lot of numbers in there statements in their EULA where they're allowed to do all sorts of things with that data and then resell it, right? I don't love that, but they're playing legally within the rules right now. And so are they bad people for using that as their primary revenue source, selling my DNA information without my permission? I don't know that they are. I don't like it. I would sure like that there were a big warning label. I'd like even more for me to be able to delete it, but as it is, those are the rules here. That is sadly ethics encoded into regulation.
So Rebecca talked about kind of owning the process kind of from a product point of view. Should that be the case that she marks her own homework, or should there be a kind of a higher power to kind of audit this activity? What's your take on that, Haniyeh? What's your view on kind of who wields the big stick?
So part of this would go through, the internal process, having a thorough documentation of everything that we've done, all the decisions that we made. So that would help us really be able to audit ourselves and also be able to trace back if we see any issues, anything that we want to review. We would have that documentation. We would have that way of knowing what happened in the process. So that is one way of we can think about auditing it. Another aspect that came up was in terms of providing that information as to external stakeholders, whether if it's the users, whether if it's the people that the system is going to be applied to. So having that level of transparency and explainability that here's what we did, here's how we, whether if it's collection of the data, whether if it's how the system was built, and also kind of providing the possibility for them to be able to opt out if they want to. But in terms of, a higher system to do the auditing process, for example, we see that coming out of AI Act. So in some cases, they want to have independent auditors for conformity assessment aspect of it. So it really depends. There are cases that the stakes are very high. So you may want to focus on having external auditors to also review the system. But for the ones that they're not, as AI Act call it, high risk. If they're not high risk, maybe your internal auditing, as long as you have a framework that's aligned with what the regulators want, you would be able to, do your own auditing process.
Rebecca, you want to follow up on that? I mean, in your studies, is there going to be maybe someday some sort of certification that will be issued by some body that will audit an AI model for ethics and fairness? And is that feasible?
Yeah, like an organically grown kind of sticker on the box.
There you go.
Yeah, I mean, I think I hope so, and then also I'm both an optimist and a pessimist, right? I'm an optimist in that I really believe in a world where AI represents our better angels, so to speak, and that we can build towards that. But I think when you really get into it, for example, when we were authoring those principles for governance, you get into kind of these like philosophical rabbit holes, right? And it's probably similar to any other a lot of other areas of law. But I think and Mike was kind of saying this. It's hard to make a one size fits all. I think there are certain things that you can do. There's low hanging fruit. For example, parole. Make sure that you're auditing your models for any kind of prejudice. Those sorts of things. I think we'll start to see it. We have I was part of a group that did a QuSecure course for an ethical technologist certification. So I think you'll see these one-offs. I think it's challenging to do it from a regulatory level, but I think we'll see parts of it for sure.
Yeah, I'd say from the other side, we don't see that good housekeeping seal of approval on software systems. And software systems are fully inspectable. Like, they can be complicated. It can be 1.5 million lines of code, but the algorithms are there and they're inspectable. When you're talking about 160 billion artificial neurons, nobody can inspect that. Doesn't make any sense. And it's a harder problem, right? Because you're trying to certify the good housekeeping of both the data and the model you've built with the data. I think it's impossible. And that's the reason we don't have it right now is this software ethically built? Again, right, that's the trivial example of doing this for AI. And we've been writing software systems since the 50s, and we don't have that at all. So if we can't solve it for software, we're not going to solve it for AI. So what's left then? Ideally, at least you have the sort of auditability in the rear view of, well, we built this model. We used 20 years of parole data. We did a fantastic job, left nothing out. And then it turns out, of course, it's completely biased by the after lunch problem of the judges, where they're tired and cranky, and it's biased racially because you took data from the whole nation and blah, blah, blah. And at least we can go back and look at it. And we can say, oops, yep, I can see here this decision was indeed racially biased or time biased or whatever it might be. Oops, that shouldn't have been in there. And then we fix it and move on. At least we can do that with software. I don't think we'll ever get it with AI on the path we're on. It's a dead evolutionary path for ethics. How's that?
So is that a source of optimism that because the bias can be coded and made transparent, that's better than it living in my head, where I can kind of apply my bias kind of subconsciously? If it explores the model and we understand its outputs and we can shine a spotlight on its bias, should that be a source of optimism for us? Or should we be kind of pessimistic that we're just kind of hard-coding existing biases?
Yeah, so imagine you have the racially biased judge, right? So how do you pull that out? Only after years and years can you go back and figure out, oh, wait a second, there was a problem here. Because any individual case, you can make an argument that it's okay that she didn't get the credit card and he did, even though they're married. But it's this one case, right? So you have to have this pattern of behavior. Much easier if you train an AI built on that judge's decisions. You can more quickly determine whether or not there's a bias issue from that model than you could from the individual, because ideally, software or an inspectable ML model will be more inspectable than anyone's brain, right? So yes, there's a case for optimism there. Right now, though, what's happening is we are scaling human fallibility as quickly as we possibly can. We're scaling it like crazy without any ability to understand it any more than a human.
To that point, Haniyeh, will we need AI models trained in ethics to inspect AI models built by humans for bias? And, can we use AI to police AI?
Well, there are ideas around that. But again, it comes down to, first of all, what are our values that we are trying to go with? To kind of piggyback on the conversation that we had just now in terms of biases. Even when it comes to bias, how do we define our bias? Right? So before even thinking about, using AI to actually try to reduce bias, our first step is first to figure out what bias means in that specific use case that we have. Right? So when we figure that out, and it's a challenge, as much as we want to be optimistic about things being easy on the ethics side, even just defining fairness is a challenge based on use case, because, when you pick one definition and you want to be fair in that one, you're going to be biased with another definition. And when, in these situations, someone would always be unhappy about the results. So first, we need to figure that out on our own. And then we can think about how we can actually use AI to help us mitigate the biases that we see in the system. So there are tools that we would be able to use to mitigate if we see a bias in our model or if we see a bias in our data from the technical perspective. So we already have those tools. It's a matter of figuring out from ourselves how we should be thinking about the ethics, how we should be thinking about the bias aspect of it before even thinking about using AI in this regard.
I think hiring is an example where you always want bias of some sort. You're trying to build it, right? Like I'm trying to build a more diverse workforce. So I'm purposely biasing in a certain direction. It happens to be a legal direction to bias, right? But I am biasing by protected class a little bit because I'm trying to build purposefully a more culturally and gender diverse workforce, which is tough in an engineering company, right? But so it starts with, what are we trying to do? And then build a system and then double check that that system's actually doing what we wanted. We want a younger workforce. We want a more experienced workforce. These are reasonable things to say. Some are illegal, some are not, right? But you're at least understanding what you're trying to accomplish. And that's a really hard problem, like you say, because it tends to be that strategy comes out of action. Like you notice over a few years, we've been getting a younger workforce. Then you realize it wasn't on purpose at all, but it happened in the tactics.
So let's roll back from the model a little bit and talk about kind of the data. The data science truism is garbage in, garbage out. And so you see that there is an appetite, an avarice for as much data as possible, which inevitably creates data asymmetries. Some people have access to data that other organizations don't. How do we govern the fire hose and kind of the data capture? We've got on my side of the pond, we have GDPR as a regulatory function. That's not exactly been wildly successful in managing bad actors. How do we go beyond that to kind of understanding who has their hands, who has their greedy paws on the data in the first place?
Well, I'll throw something out semi-technical while everyone stares. I think large data sets are sort of an artifact of a bad transformation process for current black box ML, right? Why do we need 100 million data points to be able to understand credit card transactions? Because you're using a lossy method of compression, right? Essentially, that's what you're creating is this lossiness where you throw a lot of stuff out. And ideally, when that model's created, it doesn't throw out the good stuff and keep the bad stuff and then overfit to something incorrect or learn shallowly or whatever else. But ideally, more mathematically driven AI won't require the 100 million records to try to solve a problem. Now, mind you, there's some problems you actually need that because the shape of that hyperdimensional information space requires it because it's so complex, but most often you don't. So I'll just say, maybe that'll get solved in the next couple of years and reduce the haves and have-nots. Totally different answer to your question, but that bought Rebecca some time to think.
Well, let's follow up with that with a question to Rebecca, because on this side of the pond, one of the most famous quotes in history is, what are the most 9 dangerous words in the English language? And it's Ronald Reagan saying, hello, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. So what is the role of government going to be in this business? Because, we have GDPR with mixed success, but our government's going to get involved. And, I find it hard to believe that some congressional office somewhere that's going to write a bill is going to understand how AI algorithms work. So, this doesn't bode well from my perspective. But what do you think, Rebecca?
Oh, man, that is a good question. It's interesting. So, and I think too, a lot of in the cybersecurity space, we have to get compliance is very important, right? You've got SOC 2. If you want to work with the government, you've got, this whole idea of FedRAMP and your NIST standards. And so I think, there are areas like that where you get a bunch of really smart people together who know their stuff, and you get them to put forth ideas of how you can keep these things under control. It's really a hard question. I think, the hard thing is AI is moving. I'll speak for myself. AI is moving faster than I thought it would. Things are really starting to accelerate. We hit a few huge milestones in the last year. For anyone who hasn't gone out and played with GPT-3 or DALL-E, it'll blow your mind, I promise. So these big models, these big things that we're really starting to be able to do. And one of the hardest things for AI has traditionally been deal with context. And we're starting to be able to do stuff like that. So, bringing it back, I think AI is moving faster than the speed of government traditionally has. And so that's kind of where I stand. I think it'll catch up, but we got to get ahead of it in other ways as well.
I just say that there's the transition of taking old technology decisions and regulation and trying to apply them to AI. I hate the open source push in AI. If only your AI is open source, then it must be gooder and betterer for society. And it's got no impact whatsoever on bias. And in fact, it just literally biases software development contracts towards ad-supported companies that happen to make AI. Facebook's, Google's, whoever else. They're not in the AI business. They're in the giving it away business to drive the size of the internet, because Google gets a cut of the internet, right? And that's their whole business model. Whereas little companies like mine are trying to sell AI. We can't open source it yet. We can't afford to. But we're not allowed to make software in New York now, even though we have explainable AI that does exactly what they want, because a well-meaning regulator decided that, gosh, what we need is open source to protect the people. And it's sort of a faulty analogy, but I get why they're grasping at straws. Like you say, Rebecca, it's moving too fast. I don't understand what's going on in AI, and I do it every day because it's moving too fast.
To that end, Mike, so what we're seeing, and Rebecca referenced some examples of this, is the ability for kind of your citizen data scientists to be able to create models using natural language text. Is that a good or a bad thing? And we're making citizen data scientists of everybody, or actually are we further abstracting what's going on behind the curtain and making it harder to interrogate what's going on? What's your view on that?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I spent a lot of time trying to democratize video game development. So you didn't need 50 hackers in order to build something cool. It could be 2 or 3 people in a garage could make a mobile game. And literally somebody just made $9 billion off of a mobile game that I was looking at. So that's, I love the democratization of tools, but anytime you're using Python instead of writing machine assembly, you're too far away from the hardware to understand what's going on, right? Great question. And for sure, people using Midjourney and DALL-E and ChatGPT have no idea what they're thinking about ethically, where those models were sourced, where the images were sourced, the fact that you can literally create copywritten code within what's the Copilot, the Microsoft tool. It will spit out copyrighted code chunks for you because it trained on copyrighted code chunks and will help you break the law, right? And there's no warning on the box that says that. That's I think let's just start with people understanding what AI can do, because I think that's a beautiful thing, and we'll train them later what it is that it can do wrong, as opposed to not expose them. How's that?
All right.
Don't train models, train humans.
All right. Guys, we're down to our last question. I'm going to give it to Haniyeh. will there be a backlash because of all these issues? And will people decide that they don't trust the AI models? And then once they stop trusting the AI models, they'll stop relying on them. And then the whole thing will come for no particular purpose.
So for this one, I would put my pessimistic hat on, because pretty much we're using AI on a daily basis. It's on our phone. We use it all the time. So as part of that, definitely, there are backlashes that we see from, unfortunately, many, many headlines that we see about the AI gone wrong, right? So part of the problem is that, because AI is so embedded in our lives, it's hard for people to really separate the two. But one thing that I would add to that is, because of all these things that headlines that are making, people are now paying more and more attention to it. So they are getting more and more educated on these aspects of it as well. So for example, if you look at 5 years ago, if a headline came out, the level of awareness for people about issues, let's say like Instagram, Facebook issues, or, all the other companies that made headlines, they may have not really thought about it. It's just one-off thing. But now it's constantly on their mind, and they don't need to be technical. Even, people who are using AI, whether we want to call them citizen data scientists or just, AI users, now they know about these things more. So part of the process is that it's not necessarily would be a backlash that they would stop using it. Now they're using it in a more conscious way. They're paying more attention and would demand more. So it won't be a halt, but rather now there's more kind of a feedback and engagement between the creators and the users. So we would see that aspect of it moving forward. So it would be a slower process in terms of, with regards to severe backlash, then the creators need to rethink everything that they've done, but rather a slow process of improving it because the users are demanding more ethical and more trustworthy systems.
All right. Well, it sounds to me like we need a lot more AI education out there so the users can ask those intelligent questions. Hey, guys, thanks for being on the show. This is our first episode. We hope you'll all watch the next episodes as we go along here with my host, Lee. And with that, any kinds of suggestions, feel free to share them with us as you find your way to our websites and various other resources provided by our friends over at the AI Association that we're co-hosting this with. Folks, thanks again for being on the show.